William the Conqueror is one of the most interesting kings of England. And well, here's a list of why. Number 1. William, quite unusually for the time, was born out of wedlock, which means legally he should not have ascended to being the Duke of Normandy upon the death of his father. However, his father didn't have any other heirs, so young William at the age of 7 became Duke of Normandy. Number 2. Because of his young age and because of his status as a bastard, many of the Norman nobles attempted to either control him or just straight up get rid of him. Luckily for William, his father had left behind a group of people absolutely loyal to him and the survival of his son. And because of this, he managed to make it to adulthood. About the time he was 19, he managed to really secure a power base around him and start to subjugate and pacify the lords of Normandy under his direct control. This took a really long time, but it worked. He managed to become the sole source of legitimate power in Normandy. And a byproduct of this is that he managed to make Normandy once again fiercely independent of the French crown, to which the lords of Normandy were subservient to, vassals. Number 3. It is quite well known that the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, Edward the Confessor, had promised the English crown to William, as had the richest man in England at the time, Harold Godwinson. But little sneaky Harold managed to grab the crown from William and proclaim himself as the King of England. William probably had the best claim to the throne outside of the rogue Edgar Atheling, who was an actual direct relative to Edward the Confessor. But William was also Edward the Confessor's cousin once removed, which makes him more legitimate than Harold Godwinson, who was a brother-in-law to Edward the Confessor. So yeah, William actually did have a legitimate claim to the throne, and was the only legitimate person who claimed the throne who had the army to back him up. Edgar Atheling really didn't have anything in 1066. Number 4. It is also assumed that once William killed Harold at the Battle of Hastings, that he immediately became king. However, this is not true. It actually took several other battles, albeit small ones, but he wasn't crowned until Christmas Day, a full 2 months later, after his landing in England. And also, between the death of Harold and William's ascension to the throne, Edgar Atheling had actually been proclaimed the king by several English lords that still wanted an Anglo-Saxon king. Number 5. William's actual coronation on Christmas Day 1066 was an absolute disaster. William wanted to be crowned by religious authorities, as was common in the day. But he also didn't trust Anglo-Saxon lords or the English people, so he had the church he was crowned in completely cordoned off with Norman soldiers, sort of facing off against the English peasants who didn't really know what was going on. But inside the church, apparently, a bat flew through, causing some of the guests to scream, which then led to mass hysteria and panic. Now, the guards outside were forbidden to enter because it was a holy affair. But you can imagine, you're a Norman soldier, you're in a hostile land, you've just heard your lord scream, but you're not allowed to enter. So what do? Now, for some bizarre reason, the commander of the forces assumed it was the peasants' fault they had tried to assassinate William, and so they started massacring the people and torching the town. Really not a good way to start your occupation of a foreign land. Number 6. So once William actually became king, it took him another 9 years to really consolidate his control of England. He faced many rebellions, particularly in the north, which had famously been independent. Perhaps the largest of these rebellions was in 1069, where that other claimant of the throne, Edgar Atheling, had attempted to lead a rebellion, and he actually had the support of the Danes. William managed to crush this rebellion, though not before Edgar Atheling escaped to Scotland, where he was protected. William's response to this is horrific. He killed a large proportion of the population, and then salted the earth, meaning that they could not grow crops, leading to mass starvation and even more deaths. But it did assure that this area would probably never rebel against him ever again. Number 7. At this point, I think it would be appropriate to talk about why I personally, and many other historians, generally consider William the Conqueror as the first true king of all of England. This is because the Anglo-Saxon kings only really controlled the south of England at the best of times, only theoretically controlling the north of England, and at times not even theoretically, straight up ceding it to the Danes, for example. It's obviously more complicated than that, but the control over what they thought of as England was never complete. William, on the other hand, by putting down the Great Rebellion in 1069 and completely devastating the north, managed to secure a tight control over it. He also did this by getting rid of local Anglo-Saxon lords and putting in lords that were faithful to him. So yes, in my eyes, William is the first true king of all of England. However, this is a controversial point, and if you disagree with me, it's okay. I understand why you do. Number 8. William started a trend amongst the English kings that would last for centuries, in which the actual ruler of England would not spend a lot of time in England, preferring to spend time on their continental possessions, treating England as a sort of bother that they only had to go back and deal with when there was a rebellion. William actually spent most of his reign in total dealing with, in his mind, more serious rebellions in Normandy and quarrelling with the French king. Number 9. For me, perhaps the most interesting part of this conquest of England is what it did for European politics as a whole. William, as Duke of Normandy, was technically a vassal to the French king, albeit a fiercely independent one. But as King of England, he owed nothing to the French king because it was outside of his realm. In fact, being King of England put him on par, at least in the eyes of European politics as a whole, with the King of France. This greatly annoyed the King of France, who started doubling down and demanding more dues and respect from William as his vassal in Normandy, leading to increased tensions between the two areas. So yes, the invasion of England actually made tensions in France worse. But another side effect is that this brought England, and as a whole Britain, back into the fold of European politics, something that it had been kind of outside of ever since the Romans had abandoned Britain. Number 10. The greatest thorn in William's side was not rebelling barons or the French king, but his own sons, Robert, William, and Henry. But most of all, out of these three, it was Robert who was constantly rebelling against him, either being supported by Norman lords or supporting Norman lords against him. These problems, caused by his sons wanting more and more power, eventually led to the age-old mistake of William deciding to split his lands amongst his sons when he died. Robert, his eldest son, received Normandy. William, his middle son, received England. And Henry, the youngest son, received nothing but some gold, which would come back to bite everyone later. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this little look at William the Conqueror, William I of England, Duke of Normandy. I know I did. English kings are kind of a passion of mine, and it's great to talk about them. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment. For comments, why don't you tell me an interesting fact about William that you like, or something that you wish I would have mentioned? And please subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you soon.